Hello everyone, welcome back to this video series on clinical SAS SDTM programming. So in an earlier video, we have seen the theory of RELREC creation. In this video, we will see how to create the RELREC dataset by establishing a relationship using the raw datasets. So let's jump into the background. So as per CDISC SDTM standard, RELREC dataset has to be used to represent relationship between records across different SDTM datasets. So some commonly seen examples where relationships exist between different SDTM domains are concomitant medications used for a specific adverse event. Say for example, if a subject experienced an adverse event, so there will be a certain set of medications which could be taken to treat that specific adverse event. So this means that there exists a relationship between the on-study adverse event related information and the concomitant medications. So we need to establish a relation between these two, medication and adverse event. Similarly, sometimes the subjects chooses to discontinue treatment or study because of an adverse event. So in that case also we need to establish a clear relationship between the adverse event that caused the discontinuation of the study. And similarly, there can be some laboratory evaluations performed because of an adverse event. So we need to try to identify which laboratory examinations or evaluations were performed due to the specific adverse event. So, so in all these cases, if we see for the first example, CONMED's information will be present in CM dataset and adverse event related information will be present in AE. So, but the information present on these datasets is related. So we need to show that relationship using RELREC dataset. So what do we learn in this lesson? We will see how to programmatically create RELREC dataset using raw datasets. So I am stressing on this using raw datasets. There can be cases wherein we can directly use the previously created SDTM datasets to create our RELREC. So there is no hard and fast rule that you will have to use SDTM or raw datasets. It can be on case by case basis. So we will see a relationship between CM and AE domain in this lesson, and we'll also see a scenario where relationship exists between the data that gets mapped to DS and AE domains. So we will now take a look at the case report forms that will be part of the example. So we have basically three forms. So in all the three cases, I have kept only the relevant fields of interest for this lesson. I have not added all the other fields that would generally be collected on a specific form. So the first form is adverse events form, and the second form is the end of study form, and the third form is the concomitant medications form. So here we have this there are two questions. The first one is line number, which in sometimes can be pre-populated and can be manually entered. So this information entered for this field of line number is getting mapped to a HTML variable called AESPID. And there is this adverse event term, so which is getting mapped to the SDTM variable AE term in AE dataset. And then we have our end of study, wherein the subject's completion or discontinuation of the study is captured in this form. So again, here we have a line number. So this is getting the information collected or reported in this line number field is getting mapped to an SDTM variable called DSSPID. And similarly, the reason for end of study disposition is captured in a variable called DS term in SDTM DS domain. And say for example, if a subject discontinued a study because of an adverse event, the adverse event which caused the discontinuation, that specific number is captured in this field. So all the adverse events would be captured as part of adverse events domain, and each adverse event will have a unique line number, and the specific adverse event that caused the discontinuation of the study is that number is being entered here in this page. Say for example, if there are like 10 events and the line number 10th adverse event has caused the discontinuation, so that number 10 would be populated here so that we will be able to link the uh, specific adverse event to the end of study adverse event. So here we only are capturing the some linking variable, not the entire adverse event related information. So then we need to make a note of that. And then we have our concomitant medications form. In this again we have a line number field which will be unique for each entry. And then the information entered in this field is mapped to a SDTM variable called SPID, CMSPID. And then we have this field called medication or treatment. This is mapped to a SDTM variable called CMTRT. And then we have our final field which says if this medication is used for an adverse event, then the AE number. So we have discussed earlier that each adverse event will have a unique line number, and that adverse event, all the adverse event information would be filled in this form, and any medications taken because of an adverse event, that adverse event line number would be entered in this field. So here we are annotating this field as per SDTM annotation as linked to related AE record via RELREC. So we need to make use of the information captured here on the end of study page related to the adverse event line number, and also on the concomitant medications page to establish relationship between. So here in the first case, the end of study form, the information gets mapped to DS, and the relationship is between DS and AE in this case. And for concomitant medication, the relationship is between CM and AE domains. Let us now take a look at the input data sets that we will be using for this lesson. So the first dataset is our adverse events dataset. There is information for two subjects, 1001 and 1002. There are two events for these two subjects. The first subject had first adverse event is pneumonia, and the second one is headache. Similarly for subject 1002, there is sepsis and hemoglobin decrease. There are two adverse events for each of these, and the line number field has values like 1 and 2 for these are unique within each subject for each of the entries. So 1 and 2, line number 1 is pneumonia, line number 2 is headache, and similarly for subject 1002, line number 1 is sepsis and line number 2 is hemoglobin decreased. Now let us take a look at the end of study related data set. So we have two rows in this data set, one row for subject 1001 and one row for subject 1002. So for subject 1001, the DS term is completed, which is the reason for study disposition, which means the subject completed the study. So and the line number associated with this record for subject 1001 is 3001. And for subject 1002, there is the subject has discontinued the study because he has not completed. If the subject has completed, so they would be marking this field as completed. Otherwise, they would give the specific reason on why a subject has not completed. So here in this case, the subject has not completed the study and discontinued due to adverse event. So as this is an adverse event, so they are listing as the adverse event line number that has actually resulted in the discontinuation of the study. So we will now go back to the adverse events dataset and look for subject 1002 data, which has a DSAE number of 1. So which is nothing but AESPID here. So we have subject 1002. The AESPID1 is sepsis. So this means that the subject discontinued the study because of sepsis, and which has an ID of 1. So now let us take a look at the third input dataset that we will be using. So that is ConMeds dataset. So we have three entries in this dataset. The first one is 1001 has two records and 1002 has one record. So subject 1001, so the first entry in concomitant medication has a identifier or line number of 1, and the associated treatment is azithromycin. So here we have the CMAE number field map like populated. So this means that this medication is used to treat the condition which has a line number of 1 in adverse events dataset. Similarly, for the second medication which has a line number of 2 in CM dataset is used to treat an adverse event which has a number 1 for subject 1001 in AE. So let us go back and then check the uh, line number 1 of 1001 in adverse events dataset. So we have 1001, line number 1 is pneumonia. So this means the two treatments, azithromycin and Benadryl, have been taken for the treatment of pneumonia. So these are related in this way. We need to create our RELREC dataset to show this relationship. Let us now move to the specification for this lesson. So there is some general background given here. So for the records coming from related for EOS page and also CONMEDS page. So let's go through this text. So when the subject discontinued a study due to an adverse event, the event line number is captured on EOS form to indicate the relationship between discontinuation and a specific adverse event. We have seen this in the data. And then the line number of each adverse event in adverse event is mapped to SDTM variable AESPID. So we have seen this information as part of the CRF overview. So we have seen that this line number is getting mapped to AESPID. So each row on EOS form is uniquely identified within a subject using line number, and it is mapped to SDTM variable DSSPID. So we have seen that the line number on EOS page is mapped to DSSPID, and this each entry will have a unique value for this DSSPID for each subject. So a link is established between DSSPID and AESPID for each subject using EOS DSAE number. So what are we being asked to do is we need to create two records for each non-missing value of EOS DSAE number. So on the record where DSAE number is populated, this means that a relationship or a parent record exists in AE dataset. So we need to create a record for one for DS domain and one for AE domain to show the relationship between these two based on DSSPID and AESPID. So let's go back and continue reading the specification. So it says create two records for each non-missing value of EOS DSAE number, where EOS subject is equal to adverse event subject and EOS DSAE number is equal to adverse event AESPID. So whenever there is a match between DSAE number and AESPID at subject level, so we need to pick those records and create two records out of it. And on one of the records, we need to set the R domain value to DS, and on the second record, we need to set the R domain as AE. So for U sub JD, we have the derivation. And for U sub JD, we are being asked to concatenate the value from study ID with the subject value with a hyphen in between. And for ID var variable, so we are being asked to set to DSSPID on the record which we have assigned DS as the R domain value and AESPID on the record where we have assigned R domain is equal to AE. And for ID var val, so on the record corresponding to DS, so we are being asked to use the value of EOS DSSPID, and for the record which has a value of R domain is equal to AE, we are asked to use the value from AESPID. And for rel type, so when we are showing a relationship between the exact records, so we need not populate rel type variable. So for rel ID, we are being asked to use DSAE. We are being asked to concatenate DSAE to the value of DSSPID. So similarly, we have been given instructions to create the relationship between CM and AE So in most of the cases, the derivation logic will remain the same, except that the uh, linking variables will change. So conmat CMAE number is being checked for in relationship to the adverse events.aespid value when creating relationship between CM and AE. So we will now try to manually identify the record structure and follow the specification and fill the values. So in the form output, I have already created a basic template structure as per the specification requirement. We will try to fill in the two columns, ID var val and rel ID. So again, so let's try to first establish the relationship between AE and DS. So for subject 1002, we have seen that in the data. So the subject discontinued the study because of an adverse event which has a line number 1 in adverse event. So the DSSP ID which has a DSAE number 1 is 3001. So let us now come to the form output. So on the record, so we have created two records to show the relationship between AE and DS for subject 1002. So the DSSP ID value was 3001, which had DSAE number populated, and the AESP ID is nothing but our DSAE number. So DSAE number is 1, so which is equivalent to the adverse events AESP ID here. So as part of the specification, we were asked to use the value from AESP ID of adverse events dataset. So we will basically have to merge EOS and adverse events dataset with subject and AESP ID of adverse events dataset and DSAE number of EOS dataset. And we will have to use the value from AESP ID to populate the ID var val for when the ID var is AESP ID. So for rel ID, so for DSAE, we were asked to populate or concatenate DSAE as prefix and use the value from DSSP ID on the matching record. So DSSP ID on the record where there was a relationship was 3001. So we were asked to populate it with that. So DSAE 3001 is populated on both the records. So let us now try to establish the relationship for subject 1001 between AE and CM. So let's go to our data set. So this was conmets. So in conmets, CMSPID1 is related to AESPID1 of adverse events. So let us now try to fill in the information. AESPID was also 1, CMSPID was also 1. So on this record, so we were asked to populate the rel ID with the value of CMAE concatenated with the value of CMSPID. So CMSPID is 1 in this instance. So similarly, there was a second instance wherein CMSPID2 was related to CMAE number 1. So CMSPID2 will be populated on the record where R domain is equal to CM and AESPID would be populated with a value of 1. So let us now try to populate. AESPID1 is related to CMSPID2. So on this record, so we were asked to populate the CMSPID as the rel ID variable, rel ID value. So this is how we need to have our final data set structured. So let us now see the programming for this. So first we are trying to create relationship between DS and AE domains. So as we need to merge EOS and AE datasets, so the linking variables are slightly different in these two. The names of the linking variables are slightly different in these two datasets. In EOS dataset, the adverse event number is present in a variable called DSAE number, and but the line number of that adverse event is present in a variable called AESPID in adverse events dataset. For that, I am creating a variable called AESPID by using the value from DSAE variable in the EOS dataset. So I am filtering only those rows where DSAE number is not missing. So because we need to establish a relationship only when there is AE number is populated. So I have created AESPID in the EOS dataset in this dataset name DSAE underscore EOS. And I have also assigned like a common length for these two variables in these two datasets so that we do not get any warnings when we are trying to merge the datasets. So here we are merging adverse events and EOS dataset to check if a matching record exists between these two datasets. So we need to have a matching record, which means like for a subject, if say for example, if DSA number one or the line number one is said to have a relationship, then there should exist a record in adverse event for that subject with that line number in adverse events dataset as well. So for that we are merging these two datasets at study subject and AESPID level. So and we are keeping the records if a record is present in both the dataset, which means uh, end of study dataset should have a record with non-missing DSAE number, and there should exist a record in adverse event dataset with the same linking number in the adverse events dataset. Only then we will be able to establish a relationship. So for that purpose, we are filtering only those records wherein there exists a match in these two datasets. And then we are creating a record for each related domain. So here we would get one record. So it would be helpful if I can show the intermediate dataset DSAE number one. So here in DSAE, it is I have just assigned the length for AESPID variable, and in DSAE underscore EOS dataset, what I have done is as I need to merge AE this dataset with AE. So based on the value present in DSAE number to adverse events at subject and AESPID level, so I have created this new variable with the same name which is present in adverse events dataset so that I can merge these two datasets easily using dataset merge. So and then in DSAE, so we have merged. So in this dataset now we have the DSSPID and the AESPID which are linked. So DSSPID 3001 is linked to the record which has a value of AESPID1 for subject 1002. So in from this record we are asked to create two separate records. So on the one record we were asked to populate R domain is equal to DSSPID, and on the other record we were asked to R domain is equal to AE. So let us now see the code for this DSAE final underscore DSAE creation. So we are using that one record which is present in DSAE and using output statement twice to create two different records. But again, before creating the first output record, outputting the record for the first time, so we are assigning a value of ds is equal ds to the R domain variable, and for the second record we are creating it as AE. And on the record where R domain is equal to ds, we were asked to populate the ID var as DSSPID and ID var val as the value coming from DSSPID variable. And similarly, for the record which is being outputted for R domain is equal to AE, we were asked to use the value of ID var val is equal to AESPID. And similarly, we were asked to create this rel ID variable by concatenating DSAE to the value of DSSPID. So we have created this a temporary variable called rel tag to hold the DSAE text and then concatenate that DSA text DSAE to DSSPID variable. So let us now take a look at this final underscore DSAE to see how this gets structured. So let us go to final underscore DSAE. So we had one record in DSAE01. So the same record is outputted twice, once for R domain is equal to DS and once for R domain is equal to AE, and other variables are populated conditionally. So we are creating two records, final underscore DSAE. First time we have outputted it for DS. On this record, we have assigned the text DSSPID to the IDVAR variable and use the value of DSSPID for this IDVAR variable, and then in rel ID, so we concatenated the text DSAE to the DSSPID number 3001, and the same record is outputted for the second time, but on the second time, so we used our domain is equal to AE, IDVAR is equal to AESPID, and IDVAR is equal to 1, which is the value from AESPID variable, and rel ID is the same on these two records. So let us take a look at the form output which we have created and see if these are the coming as the same. So here, so AE and DS, there is one record for each for 1002, AESPID 1 and DSSPID 3001 with the same DSAE 3001 on these two records. So if we take a look at this data set, this is the same structure that is expected in the final output. So this is how we can establish relationship using programmatically in our program. The order is slightly different here in this data set, but when compared to the manual output which we have done. But again, we anyhow we'll have to sort based on the specified variables somewhere in the downstream processing. So now we'll apply the same processing for our CM data set. So here now we are writing the code to create relationship for CM and AE domains. So again here we are creating a common named variables between adverse events and conmets datasets for merging these datasets together. Because in the conmets dataset, CMAE variable has the AE associated to the adverse event which is for which the medications have been taken. So I am creating again a AESPID variable using the value from CMAE number and then merging these two dataset study subject and AESPID level, and then keeping only the records when there is a match between these two datasets, and then using the same processing to output the records two times, once for CM and once for AE, because here we are establishing a relationship between CM and AE. So and again for the output record where R domain is equal to CM, we are assigning the text CMSPID to the IDVAR variable and CMSPID value to the IDVAR val variable. So similarly for IDVAR, when R domain is equal to AE, AESPID is being assigned to the AESPID, the text AESPID is assigned to the variable IDVAR, and the value in AESPID variable is assigned to the variable IDVAR val. And then we are keeping only the required variables, and then appending these two data sets which has, like, let's take a look at the final underscore CM, because there were two medications related to a particular AE, so we will have four records, once for each medication taken. So if we now see CMSPID1 and AESPID1 are related, CMSPID2 and AESPID1 are related. So we'll have two records, four records in total, because there are two medications taken for an AE. Now let's go back to the program and then see what we have done. So we have appended those two data sets, final underscore DSAE and final underscore CMAE. So this dataset has the relationship between DS and AE, and this dataset has the relationship between CM and AE. And then created this study ID variable and usubs ID variable as per the specification. And then sorted the dataset based on study ID, usubs ID, R domain, IDVAR and IDVAR val, and then kept the final required variables in the dataset and created this dataset called RELREC. So this is how we can program RELREC dataset, wherein we can establish relationship using raw datasets. So as I mentioned in the beginning, so it's not mandatory that you need to establish relationship only using raw datasets or only using SDTM datasets. Sometimes, based on the complexity of the data collection, we may uh, need to use a combination of SDTM and raw datasets as well to establish the relationship in RELREC dataset. So, thank you for watching and keep learning.